Hey, Saif, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me, Andy. It's been a pleasure.
We have got a very exciting case study of yours to talk about today, which was why I sort of reached out again. It's been probably a year or so since we last caught up, and this case study that you did recently really caught my eye. It's a big one, some really juicy numbers, and we already had a bit of a chat before we hit record about this. And I'm looking forward to sharing this with our audience today and getting into some of the detail of that. I'm sure a lot of our audience have been following you on socials, Safe, but for anyone who maybe isn't as familiar with you as I am, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing in the property space?
Of course. So, myself, before property, used to be a finance professional, management accounts to be specific, working with businesses to assist them in growing their profitability. So, a lot of transferable skills that I could bring forward into property. And then came across property, and about 4 years ago, did about a year worth of research. Went through so much little tiny bits. Started off with sourcing, went miserably wrong for 3 4 months. Then went on to doing a bit of rent to rent. Went miserably wrong again. And then thought, you know what, let's go back to sourcing, but sourcing not more so with how you see it, where let's find a deal and then send it out to a mail shot of 1,000 people and see who buys, but more so trying to work with individuals, um, build relationships with them, see what they were interested in, and then from there managed to get two or three really qualified investors, and then decided to just source for them, and then it was a much easier sell than the first time I actually did sourcing. Went through from there, carried on, and then managed to meet a chap who owned a property that I was able to spot with um, the potential of creating this into a HMO from floor plan, from seeing it because of how much research and studying I had done at that point. And a month later, he just gave me the keys and says, "Do you fancy project managing the conversion to a HMO?" And I just said yes for the sake of saying yes. Came home and absolutely crapped myself, thinking like, where the hell do I start here now? So that was a comedy story. But that went well, and then things just extrapolated from me sharing, documenting my journey from there onwards to be in the position that I am now. And then the really funny fact, well, funny or uh, I quite like it. It makes me laugh every time I say it to people. Is that the day that first HMO development had started? So this is no construction experience, no nothing. The day that started, my firstborn was born on the same day. So every time I celebrate his birthday, it's sort of like a birthday for the property journey as well at the same time. So he's 3 now, so things are great in that sense.
That must have been a busy time of the year. Well, this project management stuff I think is really, really interesting. And actually, I want to talk to you about this today. And I think you framed it in a slightly different way than I perhaps did. Although when I thought about it, I think there's a lot of similarity as to how kind of I sort of ramped up my business, Safe, and how you've obviously been able to do the same. And I want to talk about that. But before we do, in your case study that you've prepared, and for all of our listeners, Safe's case study, this project that we are going to talk about today, is waiting for you inside the HMO roadmap. But you talked about these soft skills that you brought from the world of finance, your accountancy skills that you brought over to the work that you're doing in the HMO space at the minute. And I was interested to know what you thought those skills were. I've, for a long time, thought and recognized that skill in finance and a good understanding of numbers and ability to manage finance and I suppose just having a sort of a good sort of financial. I'm not sure what the word is called. Housekeeping sort of process is a really important part of running a business like ours with lots of moving parts. But I thought, seeing as you're the man with all the experience, you're an accountant by I suppose trade and definition. What were those soft skills that you were able to port over that have helped you build your property business?
So a lot of the things that I used to do when I was in accounts was so I worked for a number of different firms. One of my favorite companies I worked for was Enterprise, the car rental firm. And as opposed to just being a number crunching accountant telling you at the end of the month, Andy, this is what you've made this month, it was more so actually going and visiting you out as a branch manager in your stores to see, right, this is going wrong, that's going wrong. How's this going to work? So you soon build the skill of being able to tell somebody in operations as to how you want them to do something or how you want them to make a decision that actually your decision, but you're letting them make the decision in that sense. So there was a few communication bits that were from there. The other thing that was really, really transferable was the whole art of budgeting, looking at actual costs, breaking down budgets, breaking down the idea of like how much work has been done on a site. So, for example, uh, let's say you got plasterers in. Plastering quote has come in at £10,000 for labour and materials, and there are 10 spaces or 10 rooms that are being quoted for. As the project goes on, they're on the site for, let's say, 3 weeks. First week's come through, they've plastered 3 zones or 3 spaces. Very easy for you to work out that, you prorata each rate per room, and that's £1,000 per rate per room. And they've done 3 that week, so you pay them for 3, which is 3,000. The following week they've only done 1, you only pay them for 1, and the following week after that they've absolutely smashed it and paid out everything. So I'm able to like sort of very easily compute what needed to be done in certain scenarios in a fair manner, and explain it in a very simple manner, as opposed to sounding like too complex. Then I realized that there's a massive industry in this, which is quantity surveying or QS, where it was, these all little transferable skills that other professionals seem to have that all pieced together for a project I was able to have as a very basic level, and able to use them on projects like the ones that I have done. So those were really, really, really handy. The idea of, I think that my most sort of favorite skill, or the skill that's allowed me to work better and quicker and more efficiently than probably if I didn't have this skill, is the idea of being really proficient on Excel at a very quick and fast level, in terms of seeing a bit of data and being able to compute it very quickly and easily to be able to spit out information that I needed at that moment in time. And that was really, really good, especially from when we're sending over a schedule of works to a builder, getting the builder to send it back to us on Excel, comparing it to another builder's report, and being able to really quickly and easily just relate them to. So I think the biggest transferable skill is Excel that I've taken from it, but the communication bits, and be able to sort of look at a situation and think, right, okay, would I address this from a finance perspective? I think those are the biggies for me.
It's really interesting you say that. One of the things that I struggled with as I started to build my business was okay, this area of finance and finance management. The bit about running a business that I wasn't really prepared for, and certainly didn't have any experience doing. I was happy to roll my sleeves up and get on site and design projects and pull deals together, but actually that part of running a business I wasn't particularly good at, and lacked confidence in, and I learned it, and really had to force myself to learn. And I learned from a former business partner of mine who's very good. He was also a management accountant, and like I said, over the years, it's something that I place a huge amount of value on, and I see the importance of it across all of my businesses now. And I can see actually how that has probably led you towards project management, and how versatile and how useful those skills would be when you're on the building site talking to builders, when you're looking and sourcing projects and trying to very quickly work out what's going to work, what's not going to work, what needs to change, and sometimes that's got to be done on the cuff. Um, Before we get into the detail of some of that, Safe, you mentioned when you first got started, it was almost a false start. You got started in the sourcing stuff first, and then the rent to rent, and then you went back to sourcing, and have obviously made it work. But looking back at that time, at that period when you first got started, why do you think it didn't work? And this to me is really interesting, because you're not the first person at all that I've heard say this. A lot of people, particularly my mentees and guys at our mastermind and people in our community, they get started, they struggle at first, and they come away from it, and eventually find their way back. What was it that you struggled with initially, and what did you, or what were you able to change to make it ultimately work?
I think the big thing for me was figuring out what actually was what I wanted as a future lifestyle in property, in terms of how I wanted to spend my life day to day. Not, this isn't the ideal lifestyle or anything along them lines, or the reason why, but this is how I wanted to live day to day. Um, the rent to rent size, whether it was rent to SA or rent to HMO, to me just and similar to what you're doing in terms of, I just saw it, soon realized that it was going to be a lettings agency. And that wasn't something that I was wanting to achieve, but I didn't have the knowledge before saying to myself, yeah, I'm doing rent to rent now, to figure that out. And it only after the second time or second strategy, which was rent to rent, where I realized that, okay, I'm making a mistake every single time because I'm going down a road that I don't enjoy and I don't like. What exactly do I want?
Mm.
What do I want to be doing here? At the time, I was playing a lot of golf, still play golf, but I liked meeting people, I liked talking to people, I liked sort of understanding what others' experiences were, understanding how I could sort of potentially try and contribute to that person's life, whether it was referring them a contact or whether it was referring them something. So I had this little sort of people person bit about me, and then thought, wait a second, I want to do deals. It's sort of chicken and egg scenario where do you find the deal first or do you find the investor first? And I was looking at it the other way where I wanted to find the deal first and then realized, wait a second, now I actually let's try finding the investor first. So I spent a lot more time, Andy, actually just going to networking events just to speak to people and not with any intention. And then I soon realized that when I started going to networking events, if I was going to networking events with the intention that I'm trying to find more investors that I can source for, I actually wasn't finding investors that I wanted to source for. I was just finding like time wasters. I was just so desperate to get business cards off people. And then what I started to realize was that, and a really good friend of mine from the golf course actually told me this, that like the big realization for networking for him was that if you go to a networking meeting to try and find work, it isn't really going to work. If you go to a networking event to try and make new friends, you get to know people that you can get on with, and then if business comes on the back of that, then fantastic. But what I found on the back of that was every 10 people I was meeting that I would walk away and think, you know what, I could have a drink with this guy, or I could go meet for a coffee with this guy. Two or three of them were investors. The rest of them were really, really good people to know in the property space. That now I would either send a message to you and say, "Hey Andy, what would you do in this scenario? I've got a room that's 11 square meters and I can't fit a bed." Say, and those are the foundations to how I've been able to succeed so well now, because I've got so many people on my phone that I could just drop a message to and say, "What would you do here? What would you do there?" But these are the guys that I met when I should have been really going out and trying to find investors. So it's a catch-22, mate. And I think that big realizations or that level of patience in my head allowed me to just develop that a little bit quicker. And that worked from a sourcing perspective. And then from a deal front perspective, it was it was being really, really particular. So as an accountant for myself, I was adding a lot of contingency and a lot of prudence into deals. And one of the things that was really particular was Andy would do a deal differently to Seth from a appraisal perspective. But I was doing the numbers so detailed, so specific to knowing that, I was putting in legal costs, I was putting in search fees, I was putting in this, I was putting in that. And I was getting to an ROI at the end of the deal. Andy would say to me that, Seth, I would need my buy to let to make me, or HMO to make me 20% net return on cash employed on the money that I've got left in. I'd look at deals and they were making 13, 14, 15. I'm thinking, you know what, I'm not going to have any luck here. Don't know how I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden I thought, you know what, Andy, can you send me your spreadsheet in the way that you appraise your deals? And then I realized, okay, let me put my deal into Andy's spreadsheet. And it was actually coming out at 24s and 25s because Andy might not have put in as much as what I was putting in. Not saying it's yourself, but it was this specific investor that I was working with at that time. He wasn't looking at the deal as stringent as I was. And then I thought, right, okay, Andy wanted 20. That relates to my 11 or 10. If I can get 11 or 10 on my deal and I sent it back, and then the way that I started working was every investor that I was working with had their own specific deal analyzer. So if I sent you a deal to look at and review, I would send it back to you in your deal analyzer. if you didn't have a deal analyzer, one of my intro calls would be how do you appraise your deal? And we'd made one on the call. And that was the agreed framework that when I was sending back a deal for them to look at, review, and potentially purchase, it was done in a manner that they had told me. So there's one thing in sourcing that I found very, very quickly is that no one speaks the same language and no one speaks the same ROI. No one speaks the same net yield. Some people include mortgages in their net yield. Some people don't. So it was ironing out all of those issues, mate.
So do you think that when you first got started, it sounds like you didn't necessarily have as much clarity as you do now about what you wanted it all to become, and it took time for that idea to mature. And I think I've seen that with a lot of people, and it's one of the things that I often tell people to do before you do anything. Really think about what you actually want to achieve from this, not just a financial figure that you want to make, not just 5 or 10,000 a month. 10,000 a month tends to be that kind of round figure that a lot of people pluck out the air. I want to do this. I want to build a property business to do this. But really think about what you actually want the day to day, week to week, month to month of your life to look like. And you're right, rent to rent is a management business. You can get dragged down that rabbit hole very quickly and end up building a business that actually you're to a large extent quite tethered to until you can really systemize yourself out of the business. And did you think then that did you see sourcing as a way to, I mean, what was it about that strategy per se that you felt worked and aligned with what you wanted to achieve on a very personal level, Saif? Was it the fact that you could isolate projects and do work on them when you needed to, and then didn't have to think about the project management too much? Was it the big chunky fees that you could earn from it? What was it about this strategy that ultimately you decided worked for you?
So there never was any sort of financial focus. Um, was never really looking at how much I could earn from it at that time. The big thing for me was, what is the easiest way that I can build experience? There were two real things that held me back. The first thing was I didn't really have access to much finance. Uh, wasn't really in a good place in my life where I had a decent bit of savings. Um, very early on, spent a little bit of money with a mentor that just didn't really go well. And that was down to, a lot of the things that I told you at the start, mate, of not really understanding what exactly I was that I wanted, or that clarity, and just jumping into certain things without basic knowledge and basic sort of idea. The other thing was I naturally have a lot of fear of moving forward into a new sector or new comfort zone until that thing clicks in my head that yes, I can do it, or that concept clicks. And the one thing for me was that everywhere I was looking, constantly people were really talking about, raising finance and working with investors and doing all of this. And the big thing for me was like knowing from a finance perspective was figuring out how the whole sector worked and how it all went through. And there's, you don't really need to be around for a long time to understand that there's quite a lot of disaster stories out there of people that have just propelled their business over too much leverage and not really bought well and bought assets well to know that this is just a ticking time bomb. So there was a lot of fear in that sense. So the big thing that I wanted to learn from was experience and take the experience in from play. The project management side allowed me to do a bigger project every single time. It made sure that, I'm not really been in a position where, I've had 7 or 8 projects running at one time, because my project management business has never really been propelled that way. I've only ever had 2 or 3 running at one time. And that main thing is to build that experience and master my craft to a level where I'm at now, where I know I can just literally I can put a schedule of works together within half an hour because I've got that many templates that I've worked off over so many different deals. And I think that was the reason that pushed me into sourcing. Lack of finance, lack of experience, wanting to sort of dip my toe in the water, and then now be in a position where I'm now looking at, right, joint ventures, or bigger deals, bigger commercial conversions for myself, or even just normal buy to lets. and being back at that start. So I think there was a lot more that I had to do to get myself to a position that I was comfortable with.
It sounds as well from what you've said, once you got stuck into all of that networking and actually trying to meet people, not necessarily to try and sell them anything, but actually to see if you could build mutually beneficial relationships, if you could actually just find people who were doing things similar to you, who you might be able to help, but also might be able to help you. It sounds like when you did that and you immersed yourself in that. And would it be right to say that this extended sort of into the online communities as well, Seth? It wasn't just physical networking; it was online networking. Yeah. Um,
Absolutely.
it sounds like immersing yourself actually in that way actually changed the outcome and the possibilities. And was that kind of where the ball started to roll? Really, is that where you started to generate momentum after you've been developing these relationships with people in that way, as opposed to going out trying to sell people a deal?
Absolutely. When you see others doing well, and you physically see certain things happening in front of your eyes, you think, I could do this. Why can't I do that? Small things, you know. I always say a big thing in HMOs is, actually going out and seeing a physical HMO, whether it be a friend of yours on Instagram that's doing one, whether it be at the start of the project where it's literally just stud work, or whether it's seeing it actually completed. For me, the HMO just clicked as soon as I saw it, as soon as I saw one live in the flesh, because then you could go to other projects and think, ah, yeah, the way Andy did that bathroom, that would work here or that would work there. And there's so much, for me, there's so much like of bits where things just have to click in my head. Like I might have a really, really missing piece to the puzzle in my head that all of a sudden I'll be on Instagram and scrolling and I'll see it. And then I'll just think, oh my God, how have I missed that? Or how did I not know that? Is that how simple it actually is? And I'll overcomplicate things until it's actually, and that's just a battle I have myself. But for me, physical networking, speaking to others, understanding what others' journeys were like, and realizing that every single person had their own journey, allowed me to have the confidence in myself to think, "Do you know what, this is just the way that I need to run things for myself and get to that same place that I need to be at." So yeah, networking, physical, offline it's just fantastic. I think COVID helped that massively as well.
Let's talk about this fear thing, Seth. Which I'll be honest, when you told me when we kicked off and when I read it in your case study, I was quite surprised because my I suppose my image of you as one of like somebody with a lot of confidence, a lot of skill, because I've seen you do a number of projects over the years, of a great standard. This new one, is jaw dropping. And you come over as someone who's quite confident. You talk well about your subject. You know what you're talking about. You've got great people around you, and you've got almost that social proofing element, almost by association. That confidence seems to ooze from you. So I was quite surprised when you said that fear was a big part of perhaps what has maybe limited some of the decisions that you've made, or fear that has pushed you in one direction. And just to give our listeners a bit of context, one of the things that I wanted to ask Seth today was, after looking at his case study, and I'm going to share the numbers with you, and we're going to discuss it, but the case study is really quite brilliant, and the numbers are quite staggering. And this project was one that you sourced on for another investor, and then you project managed, didn't you, Seth? But the numbers were so good. My immediate thought was, why did you sell it? Why did you sell that deal? Why did you not keep it? And so I asked you straight away because I'm quite black and white like that. But you said very honestly, look, Andy, I wasn't ready. Wasn't ready to do a project like this for myself, take on that sort of finance responsibility. I didn't have the confidence. I've got the fear. So I think that this will resonate with a lot of people, Steph. This idea of fear. How did you overcome that? What did you have to do to get it? Is it doing projects that you were comfortable with? It was it taking bite-sized action? Was it working with the right people? Was it working in a particular way with people? What has allowed you to move beyond that and continue growing this business? Because I think for a lot of people, that fear is something that they can't get beyond, and we're talking
Mm.
huge sums of money here. And I understand why for a lot of people, and I remember myself, the intrepidation. But how did you manage that, and how have you managed to get beyond that?
Yeah. it's a difficult one, and I think that the big thing is being really open and honest with, if you're saying no, like what is the reason that you're saying no for, and being really, really, really down and deep as to what that reason is. So I'll give an example. When you asked me that question, when I first initially did the appraisal on this, I was looking at it and thinking, mate, this is a really sweet deal. Like, can I do anything here? And I only had experiences of small commercial to resi deals, a 6-bed HMO max from a terraced house, and I just knew what was in place from a construction perspective to make this in the manner of which it needed to go. So it was 2 terraces that then converted into a nursery. These 2 terraces had a middle patio wall running straight the way through that we needed to remove completely to make it one big shell. Um, and I never had done anything along them lines at any level of that size of development, because it was a major development, almost £360,000 of a development cost, um, which is more than the total investments in the deals that I had done previously. So there's a big bit of fear. The one thing obviously was putting myself down from a a bridging perspective or a PG perspective, and putting personal guarantees down to such a large level. I think that, that side of things is very, very massively underplayed in this industry. People can very easily sign those when you're signing over a bridge, but you've got to be really clear about what you're exactly walking into there if things do go wrong. So for me, it was just it was fear that I had, that I needed to make sure that I could make this work, and I was confident that I could get the deal done, but I wasn't confident on what it needed to take from an investment perspective to get that deal over the line. So, for example, we were like almost 85K. We were 85K overspent on the deal from when we originally budgeted, because this was running throughout the heart of COVID. And a lot of that came from an overspend in materials and labor, when everything just went absolutely through the pan. And I know that would really make me squeak throughout the project. And I think the fine thing is that now that I'm in a position where I can tell you all about that deal, from everything from how many screws we bought from Screwfix, to everything from the top end of how many meters of wood was bought, I can tell you every single bit of detail. And I know now that I can very confidently do 5 or 6 of those deals repeatedly, then the one, and risk potentially breaking myself and not being able to do those future 5 or 6. And that was just a risk that I couldn't overcome in my head personally.
So it sounds like what you're saying is a combination of things, but certainly to a large extent, it's understanding your own risk appetite, really. Your fear was that even though you'd done all your due diligence and you knew what was going to be involved, there was a risk that if maybe some of the worst case scenario played out, that actually on a very personal level for you, it would be too much of a risk to take. There would be too much at stake. And just to give our listeners context, the refurb was 375,000 in the end, and the end value of the project was, well, it was 850. So we're talking about big numbers, and a lot at stake, I suppose. If this didn't go well, if something like the valuation didn't happen, if there were issues with planning, and I think it's important to highlight to our listeners at this point that actually it's okay to feel like that. And actually, I think in a very similar way, Saif, I've done exactly the same over the years. It's taken me 12, 13 years to move from the HMO projects, which I'm very, very comfortable with, that have very rarely exceeded sort of 500,000 all in, into projects with values in excess of 1 million, and refurbs around the £500,000 mark. It's taken me that long to do it, and I think for the same reasons, risk appetite, confidence, and fear of maybe not quite getting that right. And it's been developing those relationships for me with the right people, with architects, with people who can reduce the risk from a financial point of view. That's really helped me get beyond. And now I've done it and I'm doing it. I feel more confident. I've developed that skill, and I can build that into the next project and the next project and the next project. So I get a little bit more comfortable, and gradually, as I look back over time, things have increased in size. They've increased in the complexity of the project, and I think that that's a good way of trying to summarize perhaps what your experience there say, because I do think that a lot of our listeners will feel that same intrepidation about even doing the first project, even if it's not as big as this one, and trying to find methods and solutions to overcome that. In my advice, and I think you've said it, but would certainly be, make sure you do all of your due diligence, make sure you really know where you are with things like your numbers and project costs, and understand what the potential downsides are to your project. And if you're honest about that and you can stomach that, I think the only thing that really leaves you to do is actually do it, take action.
Yeah.
And I think that that you've obviously done that, but do you remember doing that first project, even doing that last project? There's still, I still walk in every project I buy, and I still take a bit of a deep breath and think, oh God, what have I bought? Have I done the right thing? And then I get beyond it. And do you ever feel the same?
You always feel it. You always feel it because the start of every project, you're actually devaluing the deal. You're ripping out. You're going back to the bones and the skeletons, and you realize it's going to actually cost me less to go forward than it is to go back to where I was. And you always get that. You always get that feeling. And I think the big thing, on the back of it is you only really see the fruits of going through such an experience when you are at the end, and decorating is happening, and you're now talking about all the exciting stuff of furniture and everything just pieces together, and you think, what a great project, or what a great thing it is that I have done to move forward for where it has been. And for me, it was just it was an acceptable risk. That I knew what the acceptable risk was, knowing what I had experienced already at any point in my journey, and was able to move up slightly slower than probably others have. But to be in this position now, where I know that I am like fired up, knowing I've got my ammunition ready, we to sort of finish the finishing piece of that story of risk. We've actually already sourced our next deal, which will be a 12-bed HMO with the option to go back into planning to try and get an 18-bed HMO on. And that has been done as a joint venture with the owner of this case study. And the full deal was funded over a phone call.
Wow.
So it adds content, it add confidence from me, and it also added confidence to the investor from their end, that they knew that everything went forward. I was never at the level of can you pay me a little bit more because you're all money out, or anything along them lines. I was grateful for the experience. She was grateful for the asset, and then we're now moving forward with a much stronger proposition for myself.
We always appreciate this sort of honesty on the show. It's why we love getting guests on to tell us very honestly about how they've managed to get where they have got to, what they've struggled with, what they enjoy, don't enjoy. And I think you've been really honest about this, Saif. And what I want to do now is kind of share some of the numbers on this case study with our listeners, because I think off the back of what you've talked about, the fear and the lack of confidence, and the deliberation and the false starts, to have done now a project like this, which is a game-changing project, really. So, Saif, this was what it ultimately became an 11-bed HMO, didn't it? You bought it in Eccles, and you paid £206,000 for it.
Absolutely.
The refurb was 375 grand. We already mentioned that. So it was a big refurb in the end. I know you said it was a little bit over, but even where you'd initially planned it to be around the 300 mark, it was a big project. It came out at 375, and you were all your project costs for just under £600,000. So that's a pretty chunky project. The revaluation, and I think that this is really, really, really fantastic, was 850,000. which represents an equity gain on this project of over 250,000. So you made over $250,000 in equity on this project. But I don't think that that's the best bit. That's amazing. And actually, they're the sort of numbers you strive for. And when we look at our commercial to resi projects, it's these sorts of chunky figures we look for. But at the back end, the gross annual rent at 100% occupancy, so there's a bit to come off here, is 90, let's call it £92,000. Yes, there are some chunky running costs, there's a big mortgage, but the net cash flow is best part of £4,000 a month. So you managed to develop something that created over £250,000 worth of equity, and on an ongoing basis makes nearly £4,000 of rent in a month. For someone who said that fear and a lack of confidence was a big part of building their business and getting started and maybe struggling initially, they're quite monumental stats, and in the nicest way possible, Saif. You haven't shared or said or disclosed anything that gives you any seemingly sort of superhuman skills. So to me, it's an amazing project, but this is the sort of project that, with the right approach, it sounds like anybody could go and do and replicate. Tell us about how you found the deal. How do you find a project like this? Because at the minute, it's a tough market, and a lot of people are saying that they're struggling with deals, that things are too expensive. This is, evidence that fantastic deals are definitely out there. How did you find this deal, Seth?
This was on Rightmove. Random, honest to God, random Sunday afternoon. Sat there with a brew. Thought on my phone, let's just skip through Rightmove. I heard a lot about Eccles at this point. It was an Article 4 area. When I first started, Article 4 wasn't in place. In Eccles, every man and his dog was looking in Salford. Around Media City, it was a real hot zone. Like, you could buy terrace houses for 60,000, spend 60 grand on them, make them a 5-bed HMO, and people were then selling them as flips for 160, 170,000. People were making insane amount of money just by the HMO. I personally think just by buying HMOs and constantly people buying properties to convert into HMOs, the prices in that area has just soared. And completely changed the area. Article 4 came into play very quickly, calmed things down. And so there was a lot of risks with this. One of the things that for me was just like, this has to be too good to be true. Like, why is this advertised for such a good price? Is I was looking at doing a project management deal for another investor who was buying a terraced house a few streets away, to convert that into a 7-bed HMO, and he was looking at buying that for 360,000. So to me, like, it originally came on the market for about 240, 250, and I thought that, something has to be wrong here. Like, I need to go and view this. So I viewed it straight away, looked at the floor plan, measured everything up with a laser measure, and realized that a 10-bed HMO would work here. Put an offer forward of 200k subject to planning. That got rejected. They came back to me and said, we'll give you 206 unconditional, and it was a property on I am sold, so modern method of auction, where you have to put down a really stupid deposit.
I've literally just done the same, and I think the deposit was 20 something thousand. Awful.
Ours was 9,000, but we were able to get the deal done like 6 weeks before the end of the auction, and that was ace. And I think it was just right time, right moment, pure luck. I genuinely got to say. That went through. We bought the property as soon as I put it up on socials that our next project's completed. Must have had about 20 people over a combination of Instagram and Facebook commenting, "Oh, I can't believe you bought that. We were about to offer. How did you get it so early? Blah blah blah. We viewed this." Few people that I was already speaking to that had grown up around the area. So naturally, from the Manchester property space, there was a lot of interest because everyone had seen this deal come on the market, and for one thing or the other, we ended up managing to grab it.
I'm just looking at some of the photos. of what you did with it, and what you, yeah, and the condition that it was. And at one point, the steels in there are huge. This is a big project. You know, they are big steels. You've got you basically took, looks like, the back of front out of it. You know, it's huge steels under the second floor. It's absolutely massive. Everything is ripped out. This is a big project. And then, for all of our listeners, you must go and have a look at Saif's project. It's all waiting for you inside the HMO roadmap, but it is absolutely beautiful. The very modern, stylish design, quite contemporary, but very, I would say, quite very timeless, and very subtly done. It's you must be really, really pleased and really proud of this one, Seth.
Mate, it just I go back in, and I'm actually going back there later today just to grab a few things. Um, you walk in and you just walk through the rooms, and it's a real pinch me moment as to what we've created and how it looks and how things are. Um, Even from a rents perspective, mate. Like you mentioned, 92,000 on average. That works out at £700 a room, which is completely unheard of in Salford. Like it, we've got a fantastic lettings agent that we've used, and when we originally did this deal, Andy, we were looking at an average of 575, so about
Mm-hmm.
75k gross rent. We then relooked at the numbers as we were doing the development. One of the things that we added in here is that we could have actually made this into a 13-bedroom HMO with one kitchen. We lost one of the bedrooms to create a cinema room. We lost another bedroom to create a second kitchen and a living room. The cinema room is a cinema room. It says what it says on the tin. The kitchen living room that we added upstairs, one thing that we thought with that one was, because there was one door to go through the kitchen to then get through to the back living room, we were able to advertise that or market that to tenants as a separate sort of hosting space. So if a tenant had friends or family coming over, they had a separate zone upstairs that they could host them. So we were able to do some really clever things, just from a marketing perspective, even though there were aspects that we needed to throw in. So we did that. We then recalibrated our numbers at 80k gross rent, and then when it came to actually advertising, I always like to put my rents super super high at the start, see if they go, and if they don't, then we drop them down over the next week or two. But we actually sold all 11 rooms within 3 days of being on the
Wow.
market.
I mean, I can't say I'm surprised, Seth. I mean, the quality of what you've produced is really just astounding, and well done, mate. Because that is a superb project. And those numbers are absolutely superb. Yeah, and it's obvious to see why people would want to live there. I've got a question for you, actually, and I'm conscious of a time. Where do you think the HMO industry is going at the minute, Seth? You know, it's an unusual time. There's a lot going on: cost of living, just, the exponential increase in utility costs, labour, inflation sort of spiraling. It's an interesting time to be actively investing in the market, and I think there are a couple of schools of thought out there at the minute, whether it's a good time, bad time, whether it matters. What do you think? I'm interested to know what you think about what's happening and what the next couple of years in the industry, in our industry, in the HMO space, look like.
I think for me, I think the big thing that I'm seeing, especially in the areas that I'm investing, um, is that there is a lot of supply coming on the market in terms of room. Standards have definitely increased, um, and these are just of the rooms that I'm observing. Don't get me wrong. There's still a lot of illegal HMOs still operating in these areas. There's still a lot of poor standard HMOs that are operating within these areas. Um, it depends what sort of spectrum of the market that you're sort of wanting to enter and wanting to work in. Um, the one thing that I'm just a little bit sort of observant on is seeing that originally the bedroom with an ensuite done to a high standard space was quite niche, and I see that being very very saturated now within the market. We've seen massive successes on this property purely on the basis of having that separate kitchen living space upstairs in one side of the room, having that cinema room at the back of the property, away from everybody else, um, having that element of amenity. And the other thing that we're seeing a lot of success for is creatively putting in the self-contained element within rooms, whether that be small studios or whether that be HMOs. So the one thing that we're exploring on this 12 bed I was telling you about, Andy, is actually seeing, can we make them like layout wise as a studio, but actually from a licensing perspective, it still be classed as a HMO. Um, so it's really trying to see what is operating and what is working in an area. Because when I go on spare room, the amount of really good HMOs now as comparable as there are there. So it's always trying to differ yourself from the rest. I don't think there's anything stopping us from HMO still being a valid strategy. I think it's still a really, really prominent strategy, even though people say, "How can someone work like that? I could never live like this. I could never live in a home like this." There's a market for it, and there's a real strong market for it. I just think where you position yourself will amend and tweak as the years go on, and you adapt as we all do. But I think HMO in general is here to stay.
It's interesting, Seth. It sounds to me like the conversation is moving beyond en suites to differentiate and to give you the rental confidence to other amenities. What else can you offer? You've got an amazing cinema room in here. You've got these alternative spaces where people can host. And you're the first person who said it, so I think we can credit you, Seth, with if this is the direction that things need to go, and we can credit you with spreading the message. Seth, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It's been a real pleasure to catch up with you. Thank you for your honesty, and thank you for sharing such a wonderful case study with us. I'm sure there are a lot of people listening today who are thinking, about maybe how you might be able to help them with a HMO that they want to acquire, project management, or maybe even partnering up with you. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you, Seth?
I think if you just find me on Instagram, it's Saif Rehan, no spaces. Um, Give us a shout. We help and work with many different individuals. Probably don't do as much on sourcing as we probably need to based on the demand that comes in. So a lot of the stuff that we do have is where investors have already sourced the site and they come to us and want us to deliver a project for them. We can certainly assist with that. And we're having some really, really exciting conversations on some really big deals that we've got in our pipeline from a joint venture basis as well. So drop us a message on Instagram if you're interested in doing anything in Manchester, and we can go from there.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what the future holds, Seth. I'm looking forward to seeing more of your projects. Please, please, please give us more of this stuff. Thank you so much again for coming on the show.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Andy.